Good morning, folks. A very warm welcome to you on behalf of Deloitte for this event that ET Auto is doing on the connected vehicles. Had it been some other year or had it been the previous year, I think we had the privilege of all being face to face and doing this interaction in a large room. But unfortunately, given COVID, I think we are all doing this event now virtually and for a very apt topic, which is also, in a sense, all about connected. And hence, glad to be here with all of you for the subject, which is connected vehicles. Before we deep dive and I begin to share my thoughts on connected vehicles, I hope everyone is safe and do take care of not just yourself, but all your loved ones as well. As we dive deeper into connected vehicles, this is a topic that I think that a lot of people have spoken, a lot of things we have listened over the last large number of years. And very importantly, over the last few years, we have also seen now a few vehicles in our own country which are connected to a certain extent. And there are a lot of challenges that people talk about. People talk about how do you ensure that the connected vehicles are commercially viable? How do you ensure that the customers are willing to pay for the technology that you're providing them? How do you ensure that you monetize the data or which is getting collected from these connected vehicles and so on and so forth? But today we thought that let's speak about something slightly different. And we thought let's go back to the core and talk specifically about the customer experience and the customer's needs, which are really the core, the fundamental at the center of all this. So that is what we thought that we will be doing over the next few minutes. And as I get a little deeper into it, I think what is important is to start going back to the fundamentals and start looking at what is the journey of the customer as the customer goes through the discovery phase, as he explores different kind of vehicles, and as he decides to finally buy a particular vehicle, and he's using the vehicle, and post that he is getting into after sales service, he's getting into disposing that vehicle, moving to the next vehicle as an upgrade, and so on and so forth. Now, as the customer moves through this entire journey, the needs that he has in terms of connected vehicles is also continuously changing. And I think that is what we wanted to spend a little time on to talk about in terms of what are the changing needs that the customer has. Of course, some of the basic, very fundamental needs that the customer has will always remain, which is in terms of how do I get connected with my vehicle at the first place itself? And how is it that the vehicle can start interacting with me to a certain extent so that it makes my tasks a little more simpler, a little more easier? But as one gets into connected vehicles, one needs to start thinking about all the unmet and the unsaid needs that the customer may have, which can create an aha or a wow in the mind of the customers. Say, for example, as you get into the car, what if the car starts to recognize who are the people who are getting into the car, at least the family members who have been in the car in the past? If there are any new members or any new friends, guests who get into the car, how about the car starting to greet the person to whom the car does not know and start to interact in terms of getting to know the person a little more better? How about ensuring that the car is not just connected with the customer, but the car is also connected with all the smart devices that the customer may have? And when I say smart devices, I don't mean only the smartphone, but I also mean all the smart devices that the customer may have at his home or at his office. So the important thing is that as we think about the customer at the center and start thinking that what are the needs of the customer during the entire journey, and how do I ensure that I meet his needs as he moves through this entire journey, I think that is what will open up in terms of what the customer would really want from this connected vehicle. So the idea is to try and see how do we integrate a car more and more with the life of an individual customer and his family and his friends. But all this also poses a lot of challenge. Now, one of the immediate challenges is that is the customer going to be willing to really share so much amount of data? Because if the car has to get so integrated into the ecosystem of the customer, then is the customer willing to share all the data? And if he's willing to share, then whom does he trust? Is he going to trust the dealer? Is he going to trust the financial company which is financing his vehicle? Is he going to trust the OEM? Is he going to trust the software company? So whom does the customer really trust? The next challenge that comes in the mind is that if the customer is trusting someone, who ensures and takes care of the protection of all this data, because the risks associated are very, very high, and so on and so forth. So those are some of the challenges, and we decided to dive a little more details into some of these challenges. So we went and spoke to consumers, not just in India, but also globally. as a part of a global automotive survey that we do. And we spoke to customers all across to find out what is it that their preferences are. For example, when we spoke to customers in India, we found that most of the customers were willing to be, or were more comfortable rather, sharing the data that they have with respect to them and with respect to whatever smart devices, the tasks that they do, and so on and so forth, with the OEMs or with the manufacturers. But they are not so comfortable sharing this data with other stakeholders in the entire ecosystem. Similarly, just like we have smartphones which get updated, even these connected vehicles will need to get updated, the software needs to get updated, and so on and so forth. And most of the consumers, fortunately in India, were comfortable that these softwares need not be updated only when the car is taken to the garage or taken to a service center. These softwares in the cars could get updated even over the air. So that was a high degree of comfort that we found when we were talking to the consumers in India. From a perspective of data protection, I think that's really very, very high in the mind of the customers. Because if we talk of the amount of data that we are talking here to give really a completely differentiated experience to the customer, I think ensuring the security of this data and giving the confidence very importantly to the customer that the data is adequately secured and it's not going to be misused or kind of tampered with by anyone. I think that is extremely important. So those are some of the facets as we talk about what happens in the mind of the customer as he tries and starts to get more and more interactive with these connected vehicles. But very importantly, spending a little more time in terms of what are the themes of connected vehicles. I mean, how do you ensure that these connected vehicles really give a very differentiated customer experience? And this is what I wanted to draw the attention of all the folks out here in terms of the differentiated experience that we are talking about here. We have tried to bucket this differentiated experience out here in 4 categories. The first category that we are calling is all about personalization, which is all about how do you ensure that whatever is there in the vehicle is extremely personalized from a customer's perspective. Be it, for example, the settings, for example, for the seat, which a customer prefers, the setting for the steering wheel, for example, or be it even to a personalization to an extent of, for example, reminding the customer to take his medicines on time. And depending on the time or during the day, whether it is morning, afternoon, evening, or night, and how do you ensure that it becomes extremely personalized? Ensuring that this personalization is not limited only to the owner of the car who's registered, but the customer is able to also add a few more folks, just like you add friends on WhatsApp or any other group. How do you ensure that you extend this personalization to even your wife or to your husband, depending on whoever is the owner? How do you ensure that you extend it to your parents? How do you ensure you extend it to your kids? How do you ensure that it extends to some of your close friends, maybe? So the entire bucket, which is around personalization, is something that we thought is one very important bucket that probably the OEMs need to think about. The second bucket is all about simplification of tasks. Now, a lot has been spoken about simplification in terms of the tasks which are done, say, from a perspective of whether it is sending emails, sending messages, doing payments, for example, and all those tasks that the customer usually ends up doing while he's back at home. How do you ensure that you simplify the task of doing those, the process of doing those tasks while he's traveling in the car? Because the customer ends up usually anywhere between, say, 2 to 4 hours every day in the car, depending on which city we are talking about. So the second bucket is all about simplification of the tasks. The third bucket is all about holistic experience. Now, when we talk about holistic experience, this is all about how do you ensure that you come out with various kinds of differentiated experiences to look at the entire ecosystem of the customer. And this is the place where one starts to think beyond the car and the customer, say, with a smart home. How do you ensure that you do a lot of functions at the home sitting in the car? So if you're driving, say, back from your office back to home, how do you ensure that your smart washing machine switches on so that by the time you reach your home, your clothes are washed and they're not wrinkled? That means that the machine time just gets over when you're roundabout to reach the home so that you can go home and put your clothes for drying in that case. How do you similarly ensure that you're connecting other smart devices that you may have in your home, whether it is the AC, whether it is the refrigerator, whether it is the geyser, and so on and so forth? So the idea is how do you ensure that you get that entire holistic experience from a customer's perspective? And the last bucket is, of course, all about security, because no discussion on connected can get over unless and until we also talk about from a security perspective. But don't think of security as only from a perspective of security of probably the data that one is dealing with, but also think in terms of security from a overall larger perspective. Say, for example, if the customer is not at home, and of course he is driving somewhere or driving back home, and if there is something which goes wrong at home, how do you ensure that there is an alert which the customer gets from a perspective of safety of or well-being of other people at home, or safety of his own house itself? So the idea was to start looking at customer as the center, and then start looking at, okay, what is it that I could do to kind of look at a very, very differentiated experience from a customer's perspective. Now we find that most of the OEMs are of course trying to look at all the different buckets, whether it is personalization, whether it is simplification of tasks, whether it is giving a holistic experience, or whether it is looking at it from a safety and a security perspective. But today, as we speak, what we find is that in the journey of evolution, and if I look at the three steps out here in the journey of evolution, the first step, which is looking at, say, for example, the basic core needs that the customer may have. And if on the right hand side, I put the connected mobility and the connected customer as on the top right hand side, we find most of the OEMs may be somewhere either in the middle or towards the end of the first step at this point in time. Most of the OEMs may either be trying to replicate some of the connected features which are already available globally in some or the other part of the globe, and they're trying to bring those particular features into India as well, or they are looking at maybe just a couple of more differentiated features. But really, to move on the top right hand side, one may have to really do a deep dive from a consumer perspective and from a geography India perspective to say what are those unmet needs that the customer has, so that I can meet the expectations of this connected mobility of the connected customer. The Indian customer is no doubt extremely, extremely tech savvy. Before the customers get any kind of a hang of any kind of a vehicle, he is used to his smartphone. Most of the customers in India still are, or if not most, at least a larger percentage of the people or customers in India are still the first car buyers. That means that they are used to digital in a lot of different manners, whether it is through smartphones, whether it is through digital banking, whether it is through various kinds of call centers that they call at, and so on and so forth. And then they are looking at a car, and given that car is, if not the highest, maybe it is the second or the third highest expense that the customer does in his lifetime, the expectations that the customers have from this particular vehicle or this particular investment or this particular expense that he does is really very, very high. And that is the reason why we feel that the need for ensuring that the unmet needs, especially of this connected customers, are met is something that we need to really think about in a little more granular manner. And that's what will help OEMs really move from step one to step two to eventually to step three, to try and start meeting the needs of these unmet needs of the customers. So this is what we wanted to share today. We have put a lot of this also as a part of our thought leadership article, that or thought leadership paper that we are releasing today as a part of this event. And I'm very glad to share that this paper will be available to you over the net. So you could probably either access it from the link, or you are welcome to visit the booth and also interact with some of our folks in terms of what are the differentiated customer experiences that we are talking about. And just to let you know what this paper looks like, for example, this is the view of the thought leadership paper that we are very happy to release here. This paper, of course, talks about some of the things that I mentioned, whether it is in terms of personalization, whether it is in terms of simplification of tasks. It also talks about a lot of use cases. So it's not just talking about them, but there are a lot of use cases, for example, which are available on this thought leadership paper that I was talking about. Similarly, it talks about the entire holistic experience that the customers are expecting to go through. Once again, a lot of use cases around what could be some of the possible cases. In this case, we are talking necessarily only about vehicle to home connectivity, but one could expand this and also talk a little more broader in terms of overall from a perspective of connectivity with the entire ecosystem. And of course, lastly, and more importantly, or very importantly, about cybersecurity. So this is what the thought leadership paper is all about. And very, very glad to share this thought leadership paper with all of you here. This paper towards the end also talks about the play to win cascade that we use with some of our clients, for example. So it also talks about what are the winning aspirations, say, for example, the OEMs may have. It also talks about, for example, where should we play. It talks about how will we win. It talks about what capabilities are required and what management systems do I need to put in place to be successful in this market. So this is what this thought leadership paper all talks about, and would urge all of you to, of course, download this or go through this in your free time. Thank you. Thanks all of you, and wishing you all the best. Thank you.